Hi, everyone who's joining us. We're just letting people in from the lobby, so we'll get going in a minute or two. Okay, so I think we'll still have a couple more people trickle in, but we'll get going. It's a really great turnout for this webinar. It's nice to see all the interest. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Hillary, I can see your face. Can you see my screen okay? Or my presentation? Or Carolyn? Yes. Okay, they're nodding yes. Okay, great. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you joining us from out west. My name is Jeanette Houpe, and I am the Canadian Wildlife Federation's Native Seed Program Coordinator. Thank you all very much for joining us today for this webinar. This webinar is part of our National Native Seed Strategy work, and today's webinar is entitled Strengthening the National Native Seed Sector. So the National Native Seed Strategy is funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada under the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund. So I would like to open with a land acknowledgement. And as we gather in this virtual space, I would like to recognize that this event is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of many Indigenous nations. I recognize the importance of truth, reconciliation, and justice, and affirm that Indigenous peoples are rights holders. I honor their histories, cultures, and contributions, and their deep and ongoing connection to this land. I remain committed to fostering respectful and reciprocal relationships. Please feel free to add the name of the traditional territory that you are joining from in the chat. If you're unsure of the traditional territory that you're joining from, I encourage you to visit native-land.ca after the webinar to learn more. So next, I'll take a moment to outline today's agenda. So to begin, Carolyn Callahan from the Canadian Wildlife Federation will introduce the National Native Seed Strategy and provide an update about its implementation. This will be followed by regional talks from various native seed and plant groups from across the country. We will hear from representatives from the Yukon Seed and Restoration, the BC Seed Network, the Southern Alberta Native Seed Collaborative, the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan, the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy, and the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association. So the last talk of the day will be given by Renny Grilz, who is the Vice President of the Native Seed Producers of Canada and co-owner of Blazing Star Wildflower Seed Company. To close the webinar, we will have a short Q&A session for all of today's speakers. Please feel free to enter any questions that you have in the Q&A box as we proceed. So I think Carolyn took over, so I'm going to reshare my screen for one moment. Yeah, there's the agenda. And then I have one more slide, Carolyn, and then it'll be you. So next I'll take a moment to introduce, on this slide, I have listed all of today's speakers. And as we proceed through the talks, I will give a short introduction to each of the speakers in turn. So as you can see on this slide, our first speaker of the day is Carolyn Callahan. So Carolyn is the Canadian Wildlife Federation's Senior Conservation Biologist for terrestrial wildlife. The terrestrial wildlife team focuses on the conservation of biodiversity in Canada, including species at risk and imperiled ecosystems. We collaborate with land managers and stewards to restore habitat and conduct applied research to use as evidence for establishing best practices and informing government and corporate policies to support biodiversity. Carolyn's team has engaged hundreds of people across the country to build a framework for a national native seed strategy. This project is now in its implementation stage, which is focusing on building a native seed partnership in Eastern Ontario and understanding the capacity of native seed producers across Canada to supply native seed for restoration. So the floor is yours, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, and welcome to everyone. I'm just so happy that you're here today. I'll be giving an update on the National Native seed strategy framework. And I want to acknowledge my colleagues who've done the really heavy lift on that. Stefan Weber, who was our original native seed specialist and led the national engagement and began all of this work. Holly Abandonado, who's our native seed specialist and currently on mat leave, and Jeanette Huppe, who's here coordinating the work today. Oops, I'm having difficulty moving forward. Just going to. Are you seeing my slides advancing, Jeanette?
I still see the title slide. I see your cursor.
Yeah, I don't seem to be able to advance. And I'm trying to
escape.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm going to just stop sharing and reshare.
Okay.
It's not cooperating. Let me try one more time. Third time's the charm, hopefully.
Wonder if you drop it out of presenter mode too and just show us the other
good
screen.
point.
It might help also.
Okay, let's try that. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
And I'll put it in presenter mode. Okay, good. Is it advancing for you?
Yeah, great.
Okay, terrific. So just to begin, I just want to take a moment. This is our registration for today. We have representation from much of Canada, many different provinces and territories, one territory with also 17 international participants. If you look on the right-hand table, we have seed producers, seed users, both producers and users. I can assume those are seed producers who are also participate in restoration, and neither. And those would be interested parties, policymakers, etc. I just want to take a moment and say this is a good representation of where we've come as a community thus far. It's very satisfying to see the level of interest, and I think it's just going to continue to grow. Oh dear, this is really not cooperating and not able to advance again. Oops, there we go. Okay, I think there's a delay. I just have to be a little bit more patient. Okay, the National Native Seed Strategy. Keep in mind, native seeds are the foundation of so many things. And if you look at the circles around this diagram, which Stefan created, these are obligations, promises, priorities of the federal government, and there are many things that native seed touch upon. And probably for this community, I don't need to go through in much detail the need for native seed. The plants from seeds store carbon in the soil. Very importantly, our international commitments to the Global Biodiversity Framework, Target 2, is to restore 30% of degraded land, at least to have it under active restoration by 2030. And then the bond challenge is for 19 million hectares of restoration. We don't have enough seed to make those promises. And that's a really important piece and one of the reasons why we're doing this work. It's also really important for rural economic development. And I just want to say seeds and, of course, the plants that they grow into have value of intrinsic use. They have intrinsic value and a right to be in and of themselves and very much worthy of our attention. The native seed industry in Canada is nascent. We have few guidelines and policies that favor local source native plants. The seed producers in Canada are generally small businesses, and they're carrying extra risk and doing the work that they're doing. It's unpredictable in general and cyclical demand, and there's no source tracking or transfer standards. And Renny Grilz will be talking about some of this, and we're really fortunate to have updates from across much of Canada, regional updates, and then Renny will bring it home with some really big picture thinking and details about native seeds in Canada. And he's done a lot of thinking about this. We were inspired by the United States. And I want to make special mention to Peggy Owell and Nancy Shaw, who are really heavy hitters in the US to create the National Seed Strategy, which was no small feat, and continue to be involved in spite of being retired. They're both incredibly inspiring to me. The US went ahead with the seed strategy 2015. They've invested a lot of money into the seed strategy, and they have many, many partners. They've also done a national native seed needs assessment. I believe there were 6 scientists over 3 years full-time working on this, and they identified some particular challenges that are listed here. Okay, so our task was to build not a seed strategy, but a framework for a seed strategy, as the strategy really needs to come from the federal government, but we were willing to do the best job we could to hand it to them with a lot of work that would support that ultimate seed strategy. So the work was funded by Environment Climate Change Canada under the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund. It focuses on non-tree seed, forbs and grasses. We built a multi-stakeholder collaborative framework to inform the development of the seed strategy. And we wanted to really build support for a sustainable supply of ecologically appropriate native plants across Canada. And we collaborated in this endeavor to support the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy, which is run by Caroline in Canada. And you'll hear from Jen Nada today about that. So we had a national engagement strategy. We engaged about 260 native plant experts and stakeholders across Canada. We had, these were online meetings. We built focus groups, Indigenous knowledge and leadership. We had biodiversity conservation, native seed and plant growers, policy and planning group. And then we had regional groups, Prairies, Southern Ontario, BC and Western region, and the Atlantic region. And there were seed producers throughout the regions, as well as Indigenous knowledge and leadership and biodiversity conservation roundtables. And we also engaged the federal government across departments through our work with the Green Budget Coalition. We had numerous meetings with several departments, primarily Environment Climate Change Canada, Natural Resources Canada, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and we also met with Parks Canada. We conducted a native seed stakeholder survey. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. And then we did in-depth interviews with U.S. Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Institute of Applied Ecology, Society for Ecological Restoration, Canadian Mining Association, and the National Tree Seed Center, all of whom gave us excellent detailed information to support the work going forward. So for the native seed survey, we had 203 surveys submitted to us from seed producers, Indigenous communities, restoration practitioners, and government agency staff. And a few highlights of that survey: 85% of native seed producers indicated they could expand their seed production with assured demand. And that's kind of like a magical term. Having assured demand means they can take a business risk of expanding their operation. If support was available, most native seed producers would research seed growing practices and do more restoration monitoring. We also had some engagement with Indigenous communities, and this was facilitated by the amazing Tiffany Traverse. And I'm just going to be silent for a moment. I would like you to read this quote. It's an important one that Tiffany submitted following her engagement. Thank you, Tiff, for that work and for the folks that engaged with her. Okay, so I want to move to some of the challenges that we've identified in scaling up native seed supply in Canada. There is a lack of forecasting of native seed needs, and that is an impediment to the growth of the industry. As I mentioned, if there isn't assured demand, seed producers they're not willing really to take that risk, and no one can blame them for that. Number two, there's a lack of understanding of Indigenous leadership and seed knowledge outside of Indigenous communities. And we really need the Indigenous knowledge piece going forward. There's a lot of Indigenous leadership that could be brought to bear on native seed. Number three, funding cycles for restoration projects are mismatched with production cycles for native seed and seedlings. So, for example, as those of us in the room that are raise funds for the work that we do, we often get 1, 2, or 3-year grants. The seed cycle, it's more like 5 years to build, to expand production. So it's a mismatch. Producing native seeds come with additional costs and risks not incurred by horticulture and agricultural sectors. Why? Because the government, both provincial and federal, have invested. They've invested in seed scientists. They've invested in helping to build up markets. That isn't happening with the native seed sector, and that drives up the cost of native seed production. Number 5, there's a lack of dedicated government infrastructure to support the expansion of the native seed industry in Canada. There's 2 federal government seed storage facilities that I'm aware of, Fredericton and in Swift Current. Tracking and labeling native seed origin in Canada is inconsistent and unregulated, which prevents policies that specify the use of native plants of local origin being developed. 3 more. Number 7, there's a lack of procurement policies or guidelines across Canada that require or favor the use of native plants in restoration. And that's on all levels of government, municipal, provincial, and federal. And let's just think for a moment about the big national projects, which the current government is very supportive of and is trying to build out. If we included the need for native plants in the build out, the cost would be less than 1% of the cost of the project. That's the time to include native seed. Number 9, inadequate training and job opportunities exist for native seed production, and there's a lack of integration of Indigenous knowledge with restoration programs. And that's on all of us to shift that around. Last but not least, there are significant gaps in scientific knowledge of native plant restoration, including propagation, local guidelines, ecosystem reference, and species lists from which to create reliable seed mixes. This is no small thing. It's going to take dedicated effort of a lot of people to build that up. And right now, growers are, again, bearing the brunt of that. A lot of them are doing research on propagation, and that it really can't be reflected in the cost of seed. Okay, we are currently in the 2nd year of the National Native Seed Strategy implementation. And what we're doing for this work is seeking feedback from native seed growers on the recommendations that we produced in phase 1. The recommendations were produced from the feedback we got from the entire engagement over a couple of years. We're engaged in assessing the native seed capacity across Canada and mapping, by way of doing that, mapping regional gaps. We're establishing native seed partnership in Eastern Ontario, and we continue to engage with federal departments on the National Native Seed Strategy. And we recently met with the staff from the Secretary for Nature, and we're engaging on multiple lines on that. And then finally, the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy continues to be developed, and that's with our partner, Carolina Canada, and Jen will be updating us on that. Okay, so with respect to the recommendations, we've received feedback, 15 so far, 10 from seed producers, 3 of which are Indigenous, 1 native seed collaborative, 2 native seed or plant producer associations, 2 seed banks. We have pending 10, meaning there's been a promise, and then we've requested an additional 40. So we've gotten really good feedback. We have well over 50 pages of comments that we need to collate and bring into a revised. We'll be engaging with the native seed producer community in taking that revised edition back to them, seeking more feedback before anything gets finalized. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Jeanette, I hope that wasn't too long. I'm going to stop sharing, and I look forward to the rest of the meeting.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Carolyn. That was a really wonderful introduction to help set the context for the rest of this webinar. So we'll now be moving into our regional talks, and I'd like to provide a reminder that if you have questions for Carolyn or any of the upcoming speakers, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A box. There's quite an active chat, so they could get lost if you put them in the chat. So just put them in the Q&A box if you could, please. So our next speaker is Hilary Lafort from Yukon Seed and Restoration. Hilary is a restoration and vegetation ecologist with over 10 years of experience working in forests, wetlands, and grasslands across Canada. Much of her professional work has involved northern reclamation and ecological restoration, where the development of local seed collection, production, and propagation systems has been a central focus. Her graduate studies concentrated on the restoration genetics of tall grass prairies in Ontario and the socio-ecological systems they require to thrive. For the last 3 years, she has been working with Yukon Seed and Restoration to advocate for and implement better mining reclamation practices in the Yukon. This involves a variety of ecology projects that center communities and local native seed as cornerstones of the work, often bringing together industry, communities, and First Nation governments. The best piece of advice Hilary has ever received about seed work is to see like an eagle and think like a squirrel. And with that great advice, I'm sending it over to you, Hilary.
Thank you, Jeanette, and thank you, Carolyn. Is my camera working? Can you guys see me?
I don't see your picture. It looks kind of like blank, and I don't see your screen yet, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen now, but my camera is giving me an error. So sorry about that, but I think my screen should be working.
It's just, there it is. Yeah, we can see your screen now.
Okay, I can't, so that's good. Okay, how's that?
Yeah, it just went full screen now.
Awesome. Okay. Sorry you can't see my face, but I'll just continue on. So thank you for that presentation, Carolyn. I have been eagerly following the developments of the National Native Seed Strategy and hearing whispers of it for the last several years. So what I'm really excited about is the conversations that are going to happen after this framework is mobilized. And it's so critical to be talking about seeds on this national scale. So yeah, with that, my name is Hilary, and I'm going to talk about building community-based native ecosystems in the Yukon. And want to take a moment and ground myself and express gratitude to be living on and enjoying the beautiful traditional territories of the Ta'an Council and the Kwanlin Dun First Nation. And many of the projects I'll speak about today take place on the traditional territory of the First Nation of Nacho Dun, which is about 5 hours north of here in the central Yukon. So a little about YSR. We are a majority Nacho Dun owned company that has been around in some form since 2018. We began as a dedicated seed collection company in response to the need for mining reclamation projects in the territory. Since then, we have grown into an environmental consulting and ecological restoration firm. Our core services include seed collection and banking, baseline vegetation studies, mapping wetland and rare plant inventories, revegetation research, and we also deliver community-based training in all of these initiatives. So we are super passionate about developing the skill base for this kind of work in the Yukon. And in our heart, we are a group of plant lovers and native seed nerds from all over that are really passionate about the health of Yukon landscapes and the people in them. So in case your Yukon geography is rusty, here we are down in Whitehorse. And we're in the continuous boreal ecozone. Mayo is north of us here, getting closer to the border with the subarctic or the taiga. And I really like this bioclimate zone map as it shows the diversity of ecosystems that are possible in the territory. In super, super general terms, we work in this area between Whitehorse and Mayo. And this is characterized by extensive rolling mountains, black and white spruce forests, subalpine fir plateaus, grasslands, and wide river valleys and wetlands. So the diversity of the ecosystems here and the land make our seed needs unique. The territorial scene also has a huge impact on our seed needs because we have these huge expanses of intact native ecosystems. There isn't the same kind of urban expansion, forestry, or agriculture here. But we feel, or we're feeling the effects of climate change, and the mining industry is putting pressure on these ecosystems. So despite the vast expanse of ecosystem integrity here, we do still need a native seed supply chain to respond to these challenges and do restoration in a good way. So I chose the title of my talk as Building from the Ground Up because we really are at the beginning of our native seed journey here in the Yukon. And what's exciting about that is we get to be conscious about how we are building these systems. Our group is really lucky to be guided by Northern Shoshone Dooley teachings and laws that are have been shared with us by Nat-Show-Nyack-Dun elders and knowledge keepers, specifically Helena Moses, Joelle Hogan, and Cherish Fairclough. And so these teachings have given us the principles of sharing, caring, teaching and respect, reciprocity, and being in right relationship. As an organization, we're also keenly aware that native seed systems need to be supported by robust social networks and healthy communities in order to have meaningful restoration outcomes. So in everything we do, we try to embody these values as much as possible. And these guiding principles and values have shaped our group's priorities. So they are advocating for and implementing best practices in mining reclamation and restoration, increasing YSR and our community's skill and capacity to engage in native seed and restoration work. We want to bank and use seed from species of importance to our community, and Nan Sotan Sutsi, or let's make the land good. So here are a couple of projects we are working on underneath these priorities. The first is our mining reclamation project seed bank. So we are actively working with proponents to collect, process, and bank the local seeds they will need to restore those disturbance footprints. Ideally, they're doing this progressively, and we are working on that. We do this every year as the value of these seed banks really grows over time. And as you folks know, you need a lot of seed to do anything meaningful, and especially if your restoration strategy is direct seeding or seedling. So these are some photos of exploration disturbances on the scale of minimal to extreme and one proponent's seed bank at year 4. Another project we get excited about are the plant ecology and seed collection workshops we get to host in Yukon communities. They always involve two-way learning, as the folks who are spending time on the land the most in that community have the most to offer these workshops. But They also involve art and storytelling, and usually at least one dog. Another example, project example of our priorities in action is our 2 billion trees project, as most people here will be familiar with. For us, we have been working with the NND Lands Department to address concerns shared around caribou habitat degradation and reduced access to traditional plants in the Tequantiman Forest, following a particularly large and severe wildfire in 2019. So after a lot of engagement and community meetings, we have planned to use Yukon subalpine fir and white spruce in our planting prescriptions, as well as understory shrubs, rose and soapberry, because they were also identified as important components of the ecosystem. And these two photos of our planting blocks in a 7-year post-fire stand. And in the middle is a photo of our subalpine seed crop this year. And we have been waiting for 3 seasons for this tree to produce a crop. And this is related also to a northern struggle of consistency in seed production and low seed viability in some cases. But we were able to make a good collection this year, and it was very exciting. One of our other planting sites in the Etonayak-Tege Valley, we are using Alaska birch seedlings and bioengineering structures to stabilize a wildfire-induced landslide to protect the fish-bearing creek below. We're also using understory shrubs and direct seeding in some cases. So all of this requires access and good amounts of native seed. So some success stories we've had within these projects include getting the YSR Seed Lab up and running. We now have 2 climate-controlled rooms, a cone tumbler, a dip vig, a moisture monitoring system. We have drying racks and a deep freezer for long-term storage. So this was many years in the making, and it finally came to fruition in its full expression this year in Whitehorse. And because we have this facility, we've been able to collect our own Yukon provenance seed from 10 different ecoregions in the territory and engage with a climate-adapted provisioning approach for our restoration projects. We are experiencing the brunt of climate change in a big way here, so we're really conscious of when we are making our seed mixes or our species choices that we are planning for these changes in the future. Right now, we are banking seeds from 65 different species and have approximately 14 million seeds in the seed bank allocated to different proponents and projects. So this is a pretty amazing success, as 3 years ago, only a fraction of the seed bank existed and the facilities didn't at all. So these are some photos of our seed extraction process. From drying in low humidity conditions to tumbling to monitoring the moisture in our seed fridge. This facility also allowed us to take on, well, it allows us to take on large seed collection contracts. So in 2025, we took on a territory-wide trembling aspen seed collection campaign, and this seed will be used to propagate and outplant Yukon aspens into the Whitehorse fuel break, which is a 20-kilometer long fuel break around the south end of the city to protect us from wildfire risk. And this was a really intense operation. As some of you might know, aspen have a very short seeding window in the spring, but with the help of our seasonal employees in different communities, we were able to have crews on standby when the aspen fluff started flying. So we made a successful collection of 2.5 or 2.2 kilograms of pure clean seed was collected. Aspen seed are also extremely volatile and they require immediate temperature and humidity control. So we consider this a huge success because it really increased the capacity of our team to do large-scale collection and processing. Some of the challenges we encounter specific to the Yukon are, well, this isn't really specific to the Yukon, but working with extraction sensitive seed like subalpine fir. We also are balancing developing YSR as a native seed hub, but also running a profitable consulting company. So there's often trade-offs. And like most other folks here, there is a lack of territorial policy that requires proponents to reclaim and revegetate with native plants and consider local seed procurement in their reclamation planning. There's also a lack of funding for seed initiatives, and we're always looking for funding to increase the scope of our work. We don't have any territorial nurseries or seed production orchards in the territory. But we are hopeful, and we have a lot of ideas. We are looking forward to collaborating with other Yukon communities outside of Mayo and Whitehorse. I'd like to work with the Yukon government to bank seeds of rare and endemic plants in advance of climate change. And we would love to develop a YSR nursery and associated seed production orchards so we can increase native plant access for restoration here in the territory. I think I went a little over, but thank you everyone so much. I can't believe there is almost 300 people on this call. Masi Cho, and yeah, looking forward to the rest.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Hillary. That was really great. And I love your pictures of your plants and learning more about the important work you're doing. So our next speaker today is Karina Maslovat. So Karina is a plant conservation specialist working with British Columbia's Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship. Her work is focused on the protection and conservation of rare plants, mosses, and lichens in the province. And she is working with partners to develop the BC Seed Bank Network, a new initiative to preserve culturally important and rare species through long-term cold storage.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Great.
I'm so thrilled to be here. I am really excited about the work that is happening with the National Native Seed Strategy, and it's really great to be able to share some of the work that I've been working on with a bunch of partners on the BC Seed Bank. Is that all good with the screen sharing?
Looks great.
Oh, great. I just want to acknowledge that I live on Salt Spring Island on the west coast of BC, which is in the traditional asserted territory of the Halkominum, the Senchothan, Malchosan, Lingwakwin, Semiahoo, and Suk peoples, and the long history of cultural use is what has created landscapes like these gorgeous garryoak ecosystems that are in coastal southwestern BC. And yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the BC Seed Bank for rare and culturally significant plants today. So I want to first start by just defining what we're calling a seed bank. I know that there's a lot of different ways that the term seed bank can be used, whether it's the seed bank in the soil of seeds that are there. I know a lot of nurseries refer to their collections as seed banks. But what we're doing with the BC Seed Bank Network is storing seeds long-term off-site ex situ in cold storage, so basically in deep freezes. And we're planning to have our collections collected and kept separate by maternal lines. So because a lot of our species don't produce a lot of seed, and we're wanting to be really careful that we're not impacting the populations that we're collecting from, the volumes are quite tiny. So we're talking like little tiny coin envelopes rather than big buckets of seed. And the real focus for the seed bank is to protect not just species diversity, but also the genetic diversity of the native plants of BC. So currently there are over 1,700 seed banks globally, but less than a quarter of them are focused on native seeds. The photos on the right here, the top one is the Doomsday Vault in Svalbard, Norway, which is the world's largest seed bank that has over 1 million records. And it's primarily focused on crop species and crop species relatives. And then that bottom picture is the Q Millennial Seed Bank, which has more of a focus on native species rather than on crop-focused species. And within Canada, we have the National Tree Seed Centre, which includes the Indigenous Seed Collection Program. And I saw Mary Knockwood's name pop up in the chat, so I know she's here. And then we also have the BC Tree Seed Centre, which is primarily focused on forestry-related species. So primarily conifers. They do have some deciduous species as well, but focused on tree seeds. But we don't really have anything to store native forbs or grasses. And as we're faced with these sort of ongoing cumulative threats of invasive species, disturbance from agriculture and development, and all of that compounded by climate change and catastrophic wildfires, we're steadily chipping away at the diversity of genetics that we have on the landscape. And so there's a really urgent need to be able to have some sort of a safety net or a stopgap to be able to prevent that loss. And I want to be very clear that the seed bank is not, it is focused on being a safety net. It is in no way intended to be any kind of replacement for land conservation or stewardship or restoration. And what we want to do is we want to create a repository of seed that can be used for restoration and reintroduction, and also provide opportunities for research on germination and propagation. That's something that is constantly highlighted. I know Carolyn mentioned that earlier this morning, is just how little we know about the germination and propagation of many of these species. It's also really important that this work focuses on strengthening collaborations between traditional knowledge holders and Western science, building the capacity through training the next generation of Indigenous and non-Indigenous practitioners, and also contributing to achieving Indigenous peoples' objectives to restore land and cultural practices. So the seed bank began as a really open, collaborative conversation back in February of 2024. And we wanted to be really careful that this wasn't like a government initiative that was sort of a top-down thing that said, here's what we're going to do. It needed to be an open communication to say, is this something that is important? Do we need a seed bank in BC? Who is interested in being involved in the seed bank? What are the opportunities for identifying different resources? What are the, who are the people in our collective native seed community that can contribute to it, and in what way? And there were 62 attendees that represented 39 different organizations, different Indigenous nations, different levels of government, local, provincial, federal, academic institutions, researchers, herbariums, environmental, non-governmental organizations, private nurseries and consultants. And we really wanted to get a feel for who would be interested in the seed bank. Was it a good idea? And how can we go about this in a way that's not reinventing the wheel, that's actually taking advantage of the vast breadth of expertise that we have in BC, and how can we take advantage of what work has already been done? And out of that first meeting, there's sort of developed this group of core partners, which included the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, which is where I work. I just want to clarify that this is a very much on the side of my desk project. This is not my core work, but this is very much a passion project for me, and something that I think is really important. And I'm lucky that I'm able to carve a little bit of time to be able to devote to this. And Nupku Native Plant Nursery stepped up at that initial meeting and was really enthusiastic and keen to be one of the homes of the seed bank. And when Gerald brought this to the elders in the Ktunaxa community, they we're really excited about the idea of being keepers of the seed. And so that's been a really important way of working with the Neptune Native Plant Nursery, and really thrilled that they have the enthusiasm. Coastal Douglas Fir Conservation Partnership is a non-governmental organization that's based on the West Coast, that's focused primarily within Douglas fir ecosystems, which includes Garry Oak ecosystems, and is home to quite a large number of species at risk. And they helped organize that initial gathering and are very involved. And also the University of British Columbia Botanical Garden is also an enthusiastic partner. So that's sort of this core group that's supported by this much larger network of folks that are interested. And out of this initial gathering, there came a few really key principles. And the first one was what Tiffany Traverse said: we don't want this to be a place where seeds go to die. We don't want this to be a doomsday vault. We want it to be more in the model of a lending library, so that we have active things coming in, active things going out. There's active research, there's active use and restoration, and it's not a place where things get locked up permanently. And that creates some challenges, because it means that we need to be more active on the collection side of things. But I also think it's a really important principle, and it's a really important way of making sure that these seeds don't just wither away and reach their expiry date in this long-term storage. We wanted to make sure that we're drawing on the range of skills and resources that are already present in the province. We have an incredible diversity of plant nerds that are doing so much active work, and because our resources are so limited, we want to make sure that we're engaging with as wide a network as we possibly can and taking full advantage of the incredible skills and activities that are already happening in the province. Another key thing was that it's really important for us to be focused on species that are culturally significant and not just species at risk. I came up at this with a plant conservation lens and a species at risk lens, and it's been really good to be able to increase that foundation for the seed bank. And there's also the understanding that we need to be thinking about maintaining the genetic diversity of key restoration species. We want the seed bank to be regionally focused and supported. We don't want communities to feel like all of their seed is being stored in some big government vault where they don't have access to it. I mean, we're starting small with just a couple of hubs, but I mean, in an ideal world with unlimited budget, we would love to have a spider web of seed bank hubs throughout the province where each community can be caring for their own seed. And another really key commitment is for addressing Indigenous data sovereignty and making sure that the seeds are collected and stored and the data is maintained in a way that is respectful and is not giving away berry patch locations in a way that is not acknowledging the stewardship that has gone on in those patches for millennia. So after that initial meeting, I've been very busy with this core group of people, shaking the money trees and trying to get some funding to be able to get this thing off the ground. And we're very fortunate to have some funding for the end of this fiscal and into 2026, 2027. And with that little pot of funding, we are getting 2 seed bank hubs up and running. One is at Neptune Nursery, just outside of Cranbrook, that's owned and managed by the Tunaha First Nation. And the second will be at the UBC Botanical Garden, which is also connected to the UBC Gene Bank, where the actual physical freezer will be. The second thing we're moving forward on is hiring and training seed bank coordinators at NUPCU, UBC, and the Coastal Douglas Fir Conservation Partnership. The CDFCP is going to be coordinating some of the bigger project activities such as creating a priority species list. I'll touch on that more on the next slide. And also working on developing a data management system. We're planning to collect up to 10 species per year, and this will be done through contractors, volunteers, and in-house. And we're also planning to host another online BC Seed Bank Network gathering. So the purpose of the upcoming gathering is to bring this larger network together, fill people in on all the work that's been happening to get this funding and develop these seed bank hubs, and also to really tap into the breadth of expertise that's out there to get some guidance on how do we go about developing these priority species lists? Like, what kind of things do we need to be thinking about? What kind of things do we need to be thinking about in terms of data management systems? Where are the gaps in terms of what work can people do to host a native plant identification workshop, or to host a seed drying workshop, or to share equipment? So it's really to bring all the players at the same place and create a really strong, stable network base for this initiative. So one of the key things is working on developing a priority species list. For the culturally important species, we're currently working with a few First Nations to develop lists. This is very early stages. This is going to be quite a large, significant task, and we're wanting to move forward with the seed bank and collections, even while we don't have this priority species list quite finalized or even close yet. But just because we sense the urgency of doing this work, and if we waited until all the pieces were in place, we didn't want to continue having things being lost each year as this process develops. We're working on a priority species list for the species at risk component. BC has a pretty hefty load of the species at risk in Canada. We currently have 53 federally endangered plants that are listed by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, and 11 federally threatened listed plants. And on top of that, we have almost 370 provincially rare listed vascular plants. So that's a lot of species to be thinking about in terms of seed collection. So we need to come up with a prioritized system to figure out, okay, which ones are the rarest globally, which ones do we have a high proportion of in Canada, which ones are orthodox seeds, so which ones are easy to store and don't require cryopreservation or other fancy gizmos because we're at the very initial stages and we want to pick the low-hanging fruit. Which species have good partnership potential? So are there groups or recovery groups that are working on these species? Are there NGOs that are working with these species? Are there contractors or specialists that would be willing to go collect seed? And also species that have clear taxonomy. And then we also want to dive into some restoration species, so some workhorse species like some of our native grasses, species that are most at threat on the landscape, and species that represent full landscape diversity. So we're a pretty new network. We've just been like from zero to where we are now in the last couple of years. And when the staff is still, we have a new coordinator that has been hired for the Coastal Douglas Fir Conservation Partnership, but we're still working on getting staff in place at the UBC Botanical Gardens and at NUPCU. So there's a lot of learning that will be going on for these coordinators. And there's a lot of knowledge gaps for these species, especially with species at risk. There's just huge information holes in terms of how are these species propagated, how long can they be stored viably, what are germination rates. So we have a lot of work to do to try to answer some of these questions. probably one of the biggest challenges is just a lack of long-term secure funding. So if there's anyone on this call that has a good line with a benevolent billionaire that wants to create a legacy project, please give him my personal home phone number and tell him or her to get in touch with me as soon as possible, because it's challenging, and especially this climate right now, both provincially and federally, feels like the purse strings are pretty tight, and we really need that long-term secured funding to be able to really commit to the seed bank process. We have incredible diversity in BC. We have gobs of biogeoclimatic zones. We have like just so many species, and so to try to represent the diversity of the province is a huge ask. And then we have these projects like trying to develop a priority species list to get at where do we start with this, and our data management piece as well. So there's lots going on, but we've had really incredible support, and really grateful for the BC Conservation Fund, which is managed by BC Parks Foundation, for giving us funding. Islands Trust Conservancy has given us an opportunity grant. Sitka Foundation has ponied up some money. UBC Botanical Gardens has provided funding, as well as providing incredible staff time to get this work off the ground. We're working with the Okanagan Nation Alliance, who's helped us with match funding, working with Tree Canada through some funding to do some Garry Oak ecosystem restoration, which is also match funding. And also UBC Botanical Gardens has just put in a bid with Genome BC to look at some germination propagation work for both some of the more culturally important plants and also rare plants. So, and also a big thank you to NEPCU and CDFCP and UBC Botanical Gardens, who've done a lot of there's just so much time to be able to get this project off the ground. And yeah, just really grateful for the time to be able to share this work. And yeah, happy to answer any questions when we get to that point. And thank you, Jeanette, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Karina. That was a wonderful talk, and really amazing, incredible collaborative initiatives. I love learning more about what you're working on. And seeing all those beautiful photos. I think we're getting treated today, so some beautiful plant photos.
Gotta have some plant photos in January.
Yeah, some green. Okay, so the next speaker is Robert Sissons. So Robert is a restoration and vegetation ecologist with Waterton Lakes National Park in southern Alberta. He has worked extensively designing and implementing ecological monitoring programs, species at risk conservation projects, and grassland restoration with a focus on invasive species management across 24 years of experience with Parks Canada. He is one of the founding members and current chair of the Southern Alberta Native Seed Collaborative, with a focus on the development of a sustainable, locally sourced native seed industry in southern Alberta. Over to you, Robert.
All right, thank you very much. So you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Just share my screen quickly, make sure I get the right screen. There we go. You can see that okay?
Yep, looks great. Thanks.
Okay. Just going to turn off my camera just to save bandwidth. Okay, well, thank you for this. As mentioned, I'm Robert Sissons. I'm an ecologist in Waterton Lakes National Park in southwestern Alberta. I've been chairing the SANSEA, or the Southern Alberta Native Seed Collaborative, for the past 5 or so years since it's been formally developed. Oh my goodness, okay. I just want to acknowledge that where I'm speaking to you from is in the traditional territories of the Siksikapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, which consists of the following nations: the Kainai, the Piikani, Siksika, Amskapi Piikani. Waterton Lakes National Park falls within Treaty 7 territory, which also includes the Tsuut'ina Nation, Stoney Nakoda, Bears Paw, Chinika, and Wesley bands. The Ktunaxa Nation and the Metis Nation Region 3 Association also claim Waterton as being their traditional territory. The lands and waters of Waterton has been used for millennia by Indigenous peoples for sustenance, ceremony, trade, and travel, and we thank them for their continuous stewardship and for sharing the land with us. So I'm going to be giving a very, very brief overview of kind of what Sandsi is, who we are, the why we needed Sandsi to begin with, then an update of what we've accomplished to date, and then what the future is looking like for Sandsi. So the why, I mean, it's been discussed quite thoroughly in the previous presentations that about the challenges of native seed. And we all know that successful ecological restoration is difficult, time-consuming, and expensive. And that's an understatement, probably. The restoration activities, the whole cycle of restoration, usually starts with a plan on a site. And acquiring native seed becomes like the second or the most important next step after developing a restoration plan. And then you move into site prep and seeding and monitoring and that cycle of management of that site. And hopefully within 5, 10, 15 years, you have a successful restoration. That's acquiring that native seed or that seed supply chain is somewhat the most challenging aspect of this cycle. So essentially, in a restoration plan, you're trying to find the right plant, the right seed at the right place at the right time. Usually that right seed is native species. There are some, reasons to use a non-native species. But that seed, when we talk about seed, it can be planted as a seed or as a seedling or in a plug form, which you see in this picture. So fundamentally, there's this lack of suitable, high-quality, regionally adapted native seed to restore existing and planned restoration projects in southern Alberta, and that regionally adapted is quite important. Wild harvesting can provide that large quantities of seed from a few species, or small quantities from a diverse suite of species. Usually mechanical, you get large quantities of a single species, and then hand collecting, you can be more selective and get a bigger diversity. And I'm not even, wild harvesting is also essential for future needs of seed to augment the trials or the growing trials of seed when they're in an agricultural setting. Those do need to be refreshed on a frequent basis. But the challenge with wild harvesting is that native seed is not always available when you're maybe ready to harvest it, or you may not have access to the site where the seed is. And that's adding to all the other challenges that have already been mentioned. Commercial markets can be used to augment the local collections, but there have been some challenges or issues with seed quality, invasive species in the mix, unknown provenance, not knowing where that seed originated from, limited diversity, you can't get that right species that you need, or even incorrect species, or what you buy may not be what you actually get. That's pretty infrequent, but it has occurred. So Sandsi initially started in 2018, and it wasn't really called Sandsi then. It was just a small group of local government organizations in Southwest Alberta that sort of started talking and meeting together to share resources, share knowledge, and share seed amongst us for our restoration activities in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Over time, though, that interest in that little group grew, and to the extent now that we have 50 or more participants or members of Sandsi. That includes NGOs and independent consultants, Indigenous nations, growers, wild seed harvesters, and industry reps, all with that interest in improving the availability of local native seed. That's the key. And we currently are essentially have an open door policy. If you have an interest in native seed in southern Alberta, and you have lands where native seed may be harvested or expertise, then you're welcome to join. And we currently operate under the umbrella of the Grasslands Restoration Forum, without which we would not be as successful as we are today. Grasslands Restoration Forum is a restoration knowledge hub for prairie restoration and beyond. It's excellent. So our geographic scope for Sandse, as I mentioned, when we started small, we were in the southwest portion of Alberta where Waterton Lakes is, Castle Provincial Park, and then in this region of Ranchland County. And now we're focused on foothills, parkland type ecosystems, but we've since expanded our scope to be essentially all grassland, parkland communities in southern Alberta. So we're now almost up to Edmonton, to the Saskatchewan border, down to the Montana border. So over time, what have we started to accomplish? Well, I mean, the first few years we spent a lot of time sort of trying to understand all the issues people were having and getting ideas together. And we did, at some point we realized that we needed a plan to really formulate or define what Sandse was about and what we needed to get done. So we held a workshop in the fall of 2023, linked to the Grasslands Restoration Forum annual meeting, and had about 50 or so people join and just brainstorm ideas and to provide direction for the group's activities for next year. All of that went into the development of a strategic plan. So the strategic plan was completed in 2025. 3 main goals in that plan, and then there's a bunch of sub objectives within these goals. But we need to establish Sandse as a organizational structure, so it's been fairly loose and not formal, so to speak. We're just a group of people talking, more or less, and establish Sandse as also a not-for-profit, so to come out from under the umbrella of Grasslands Restoration Forum and be our own entity. And then, of course, securing funding, which is a challenge for everybody. Our second goal is to improve communications, outreach, and education to sort of let people know what Sandse is about, who we are, and then share some of the info and knowledge that we have with the broader audience. And then goal 3 is that primary objective of to increase that access to genetically appropriate native plant material, and that's probably through an improved native seed industry as much as possible. We kind of need to get the first 2 goals rolling and established before we can fully move into focusing on 3. And throughout this, we've all been, this is all volunteer. So as mentioned from other groups, we're all doing this off the side of our desk, and there's we're doing what we can with the limited time and that we have, with no dedicated people on this. So we also developed our vision of reliable, high quality, ecologically appropriate local native seed sources are available for projects in southern Alberta, and the mission to advocate for and facilitate the growth of a sustainable and local source native seed industry. So since that workshop, we've developed sort of divided our group into a steering committee made up of a smaller group of people that sort of are implementing or setting the focus for Sandse, and an advisory committee consisting of the full membership that gives us advice and direction as well to the steering committee. And that's about as much formal structure as we have to date. But since then, we've created a few, which I think are very valuable documents, getting that information out and the education out to people. This code of practice for native seed harvesting is designed to provide operational guidelines for those harvesting native seed to reduce our impacts when we're doing harvesting activities, typically by mechanical means. And coupled with that was a native seed harvesting information handout for landowners. So when our partners are knocking on the door saying, I would like to harvest seed on your land, they can hand them this and say, this is what it's all about. This is what harvesting native seed means, and describe sort of the how we minimize or mitigate any potential impacts to the land. So we also, through the efforts of one of our members, Jane Lancaster, who's the lead for Grasslands Restoration Forum as well, she's secured funding for us for our first time last year, or in 2024, I believe. And we were able to use that funding to actually do our first contract out to do this native seed market needs and capacity assessment. And this was designed to identify the current state of and opportunities to improve the native seed industry in Alberta. And it was very informative, and it will help us moving forward. So the future of SANSI, what does that hold for us? Coupled with that funding that we got, forward. We do need to do this register as a not-for-profit. That's a priority for us. We do need to develop a more formal organizational structure and have more formal elections of the chair, co-chair, and secretary, treasurer, whatever there may be in that structure. And of course, we need to secure more funding to be able to move this process forward. We're fortunate to have some of that funding. We use that to hire a coordinator to achieve these. So someone who can dedicate their time, and that's Caitlin Mercier from Ecologic Horticulture. So she's taken on this role and this task, and it's been fantastic to have that dedication so far. But the long term, though, it is during the development of SANSI, another organization in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I think were inspired by SANSI and decided to develop their own similar organization. So recently, they've reached out to us and said, maybe we should merge our efforts to reduce redundancies, reduce that competition for limited resources and funding. So I'd say maybe this is a time to say goodbye to SANSI. I mean, that's dramatic, but it just means there might be transitioning into looking at expanding across all Prairie Canada. What we'll become, we don't know. This is a very preliminary discussion, but it's an important discussion. And I think it's a valuable one and can add a bit more cachet to the whole group. So that's it in a nutshell, SANSI, and what we are about and where we're going. If you would like any more information about us, then there's the contact information below. All the documents I mentioned are on the Grasslands Restoration Forum website. I would just like to thank all the members of the steering committee and advisory. There's just too many to list anywhere, but they know who they are, and I just want to thank them for that. And that's it for me.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Robert. That was a really great presentation, and it was wonderful to learn more about SANSI and its history, accomplishments, resources, next steps, and potential future collaborations. So our next speaker is Chet Newfield. So Chet is the Executive Director of the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan, founder and current treasurer of the Saskatchewan Invasive Species Council, and one of the co-founders of the Canadian Council on Invasive Species. He has worked for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada, and has consulted with various agencies. His work has included projects dealing with climate change and native grasses, restoration of native prairie rare plants surveys, seed bank studies, and invasive species management. He specializes in plant ecology and is also a professional agrologist with the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrologists. I can see your slide there, Chet. That looks looking great.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll keep my camera off. It's not a bandwidth issue. I'm just an ugly person. Also, one comment before I start. The share screen button is precipitously close to the end session button, but I guess Microsoft likes to live on the edge. So who are we? I'm the Executive Director of the Native Plant Society. We're a nature-based charity in Saskatchewan. We've got 400 members approximately across Saskatchewan and elsewhere. We've actually got some maybe ex-Saskatchewanians that are living in Manitoba and Alberta and still want their Saskatchewan fix. So we've got a few outside of the province. We just finished celebrating our 30th anniversary, so that was a big milestone for us. And we've got social media channels on Facebook and Instagram. So if you are on there, just look for the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan and you will find us. So I'll just like highlight a few past projects because, 30 years is a long time, and we initially started to kind of promote the native seed industry in Saskatchewan back in the 90s. It's pivoted since, but we still keep that at the core of what we do. So we consult with all sorts of levels of government, industry, NGOs, Indigenous organizations, basically whoever will have us and listen to us and wants our feedback on any of that. We've hosted native seed collection workshops, field tours to seed production operations, seed cleaning operations, recently restored habitats using those native plant materials. We worked with the Ministry of Highways on a roadside revegetation. Well, it turned out to be more than a reference manual, field guide, and pocket guide. It turned out to be a whole native seed use policy, which was a major turning point for the Ministry of Highways. And they largely run that on their own with very little input from us now. And they use native species wherever they can in some really big projects, hundreds of kilometers worth of highways in Saskatchewan. And then we had the Regina Plains Native Seed Nursery. So the Regina Plains were one of the first and heaviest settled parts of Saskatchewan. There's less than 1% of the Regina landscape plain left. So there are these tiny little pockets where we collected native seed from, planted them out in nursery plots. We had about 80 species, and those were given away to local schools to help native plant learning gardens establish. So we've done a lot. Grow with Us is one of the pillars of our organization, so that works with mostly horticultural users and producers of native plant materials. And so the image on the left just shows you our native plant material and services supplier list, which is online. We also have print copies, and that's updated annually. So there's, I want to say, about 70 native plant and seed producers in the Prairie region that we have listed, and annually we reach out to all of them to see what they've got, so that we can update the appendix at the back, which is it's really useful. It's also really really onerous for us to keep updated all the time. If you're looking for something like Blue Grandma, for example, instead of calling all those 70 producers and getting about 69 no's, you can go to this appendix at the back, look up the scientific name, and it'll give you all of the codes, all of the producer codes of those who supply that species. Take the guesswork out of that. So that's really useful. It also has service providers for those who do native seed testing or custom native seed harvesting and cleaning, things like that. We also have a searchable database for native plants and seeds on our site. It's kind of like Facebook Marketplace just for native species. And then those who are suppliers, who are also members of ours, can post advertisements saying, hey, I supply these species, please contact me if you want any. So that's a really useful resource as well. And the nice part about that one is it's largely up to those who are posting either wanted ads or I have this for sale ads to keep them up to date. They're only valid for so long, and then those people will get reminders to renew their listing or just have it deleted. We've got a bunch of online and print resources. The image on the left is our restoration revegetation resources page. That's just the very top of it. It scrolls for about 4 pages. There's a ton of resources there, including that those highway revegetation guidelines that I had mentioned, which interestingly, after that had gone out, was so successful that I got a call from Manitoba's version of our Ministry of Highways And they're trying to get their own version done. So it's great to see that work spreading. These are some of the printed materials you see. Native species mixtures for restoration is sold on our online store in a print copy. Cultivating Our Roots is a really great book by Nora Stewart, who is a native seed producer for many, many years in the Moose Mountains area of Saskatchewan, and she wrote this book. And then we've got a little print booklet called Native Seed Harvesting and Marketing for those who want to try and get into the business. Most recently, we had a native plant materials market assessment. We've been doing these as a society since the late 90s. But I would say since about 2005, the questions have been more or less standardized. And so we followed those questions so that every about 10 years, we will redo this market assessment, and then we can hopefully get some trend data because the questions are the same. So we had our best response yet of any of these market assessments we've ever done. We had 56 out of 71 no native plant material providers respond to us, and that was largely in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, but we did put it out to a few in BC and then a few in northern Montana as well. In the executive summary of this, and this is online, you can find this report online. The successes, we're probably at the best we've ever been for diversity and availability of native species. Most of the people we surveyed anticipated an increase of native plant material use and purchases in the near future. A lot of the user group was in fell into the younger age categories, which probably bodes well for an industry that wants to have some longevity to it. And there was a slow but steady capacity building by providers of native plant materials compared to years past. Some of the challenges, and these challenges have not gone away. They might have lessened somewhat, but they're largely the same challenges we've seen in previous assessments of the native plant materials industry. And that is users are still not satisfied with the selection of native species. There's still a bit of a disconnect between users and providers. Users think that maybe they can just get 100 kilograms of this certain species by the end of their construction project, which is 3 months from now. There's a lot of providers of native plant materials who still don't make enough on this to have it be their full-time job. So there's obstacles there, and maybe once those folks can get to a full-time job, they can, really grow that operation, no pun intended. So that's my presentation in a nutshell. We're very, very busy all the time. This picture actually was on Nora Stewart's land in the Moose Mountains. You can see lovely little blue stem in the foreground there, and that was at one of the seed collecting workshops that we had that she was the host of. If you need to contact me with any questions, or if you're looking for anything that you can't find on our website, that's how you get a hold of me. Also, I will say, if anybody wants the raw data from that market assessment, we'll freely give that out. It will be anonymized, so you won't know who gave what answers, but you will have all of the answers in the raw form, because why not? If we can make it useful for somebody else, why not? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chet. It was really great to learn more about what the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan has been working on, and to learn about some of your impactful initiatives and helpful resources. So thank you very much for that. Today's next speaker is Jennifer Nada, Carolinian Canada's Healthy Habitat Manager, who will be providing information about the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy, or SOS, and its implementation. So Jennifer is a co-author of the strategy and currently helps facilitate 4 regional native seed and plant partnerships across Southern Ontario. So these partnerships support collaboration among growers, practitioners, researchers, and communities to implement SOS goals, strengthen seed supply chains, and advance regional restoration objectives. She also leads Carolinian Canada's In the Zone program, a collaboration initiative with WWF Canada that connects people, knowledge, and action to heal landscapes through native plants. Jennifer's work brings together science, community, and businesses to grow healthy habitats for a resilient green future that's grounded in the spirit and practice of reconciliation. So, Jen, we can see your behind the scenes like slide switching screen. I don't know if you meant to show that screen or the other screen.
Oh, shucks. Yeah, I did mean to show the other screen. There's always got to be some kind of glitch. Bear with me a moment, folks.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, be right back. All right, try it again. Not quite sure what to do differently, but let's see if this time works.
Oh, that's a different screen. So that one, yeah, there it goes. Full
Okay,
screen now.
is it still okay? Yay.
It looks great. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
And of course
it just
started on the
switched
wrong
over
slide.
to the other one.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah, that's strange.
Yeah, this is a bit of a monkey wrench. Let me try a third time. I'm only, sorry, Jeanette. I have the option of screen and window. I'm trying to do screen. Let me see.
And if it keeps doing it, you could always just not maximize it and go through the slides in your presentation too.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay. I don't suppose this one's working either?
That is looking good.
Okay. All right, let's go for it. Yeah. If I don't hear from you, I'll assume it's looking good. Thanks. Sorry,
good
folks.
Luck. Thank you.
Let me just scoot everything around so I can read and we'll be good to go. Okay. Thanks. We're really happy to have an opportunity to connect with you folks this afternoon. I'm going to give a bit of a background on the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy, or SOS, for those of you who aren't familiar or need a little refresher of what we've been up to. And that'll take me a little while. It's been a bit of a journey. And then I'll let you know where we're at now with implementation of the strategy. I gotta make sure it advances. All right, a bit about us. We are a nonprofit working to heal and protect the Carolinian Zone through programs, resources, and relationships. And we've been around for 40 years. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary. We're a partnership organization with an Indigenous leadership pillar. And our Indigenous leadership pillar, or a director, fosters reciprocal relationships with the 10 First Nations within the Carolinian Zone and beyond. So for these reasons, our past priorities, our focus, our partnerships, the team we had assembled, we really felt well positioned to develop a seed strategy for Southern Ontario. And this work started even further back with this report, The Economy of Hope, which can be found at the bottom of the slide there, at the link or on our website. This document is really foundational to the SOS, and it focuses on the need to reverse the trend of biodiversity loss and increase climate resilience, and to develop a profile and inform an understanding of the native plant sector, primarily in the Greater Golden Horseshoe region, the central region of Ontario, with a high population where Toronto can be found. We did a lot of our research there, but the implications reach far beyond that region. Out of this report arose 6 main recommendations. 2 of those were to center Indigenous leadership and engagement and develop a seed strategy for Southern Ontario. Sorry, pop-ups popping up. Okay, so digging into some of that research that we did on both the supply and the demand side, the top 5 barriers to growth, according to native plant growers, included things like market instability, limited operation size, the need for significant financial investment, lack of funding or budget, and limited seed sources. So a lot of this quantitative data really arose from this report and helped direct our next steps and identify gaps. But in addition to this really important quantitative information, some of the qualitative things like stories really started to emerge in this report. Like this one, the guess and grow model. The number one challenge is trying to predict what will be in high demand in future seasons. Since it fluctuates and changes every year, it would be very helpful if growers could be included in conversations surrounding future planting plans, estimated quantities, and estimated species. So stories like this were really brought to light as we really kind of dug deeper into the story and the folks working so hard within the native plant sector. On the demand side, some of those challenges included things like lack of funding or budget, limited plant sources, the need for significant financial investment, limited size of operation, and limited seed sources. So not only was really important information starting to emerge, but this preliminary work, connecting with partners, with growers, with folks all through sectors, the Indigenous communities, this relationship building, even before starting to develop that collective and working on the strategy together was so important. And it really started years ago. And it was timely because there's a huge need for seed, as you well know. Native plants are needed to support the global, national, and regional targets we're all working so hard toward, and retail demand, and we simply don't have enough. The targets depend on a reliable supply of native seed. Not just any seed, we need the full diversity of ethically sourced, genetically appropriate native seed and plants to be available when needed and in large quantities. And that brings us to the strategy itself. If you haven't had a chance to explore, it can be found on the website there and on our website. And it's really the culmination of 4 years working together to develop a strategy that aims to grow more native plants, grow them better, and set a course for the preservation and restoration of the landscape in Southern Ontario. Our goal was to accomplish this by working together in ethical space to share knowledge and develop innovative solutions. We accomplished this through the establishment of a diverse collective, a commitment to two-eyed seeing, and a lengthy journey to develop a native seed strategy for the region. With over 100 organizations and individuals participating in the development, 10 partner organizations officially signing on, and we did this through regular meetings, Indigenous-only roundtables, working groups, and collective surveys to meet folks where they're at and have the right tools and resources for folks to be able to participate and contribute so that it was truly a strategy for Southern Ontario. And a bit of a high-level look at it, you can see our vision is a full diversity of native plants, cultural practices, and thriving ecosystems flourishing across a healthy Southern Ontario landscape. The mission is to ensure the availability of source-identified native plants for cultural needs and ecological restoration to heal relationships with the land and people. The SOS contains 5 main goals, with a focus on establishing ethical space within the native plant sector, increasing supply and supporting demand for native plants, developing tools to support seed conservation and stewardship, developing strategies for the use of native plants within sectors, and identifying further two-eyed seeing knowledge needs to go from there. The 5 goals are supported by 15 objectives and 43 recommendations, all toward the goal of increasing supply, supporting demand for reliably available seed. Two-eyed seeing was what guided this process, and it can be defined as learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous ways of knowing, and from the other with Western strengths of knowing, Western ways of knowing, and using both of these eyes together. Much of the remaining habitat and biodiversity in Southern Ontario are stewarded by Indigenous communities. Indigenous peoples have had a vital and active role in stewarding this land since time immemorial, but have not always been given a seat at the table when discussing the land and the conservation sector. So reaching our collective goal will only be possible through that meaningful collaboration and braiding knowledge systems, which is exactly what we endeavor to do. The SOS places native plants as residing at the intersection of ethics, economy, and ecology, bringing together these values and priorities to produce a holistic strategy and incorporate perspectives and leaders in each of these 3 pillars. In light of our ambitious restoration goals, it's a critical moment to support the establishment of an ethical native seed supply chain. As the demand for native plants increases, the gap is going to be filled, and we need to ensure that genetically appropriate, source-identified native plants are available where and when needed to avoid the gaps being filled with the wrong plants. And retail demand has really been increasing too, as there's, folks have really shown a steady increase in turning to habitat gardening to combat biodiversity loss and climate change and just to connect with nature. And that leads us to what was our first implementation activity, one of the SOS recommendations, the establishment of regional native seed and plant partnerships. We jumped right into this implementation before the strategy was even published. And, you know, we had the momentum, we had the folks around the table, we had the collective, we had the participation, and we established those right away. And they bring together growers and users to align supply and support demand around regional priorities, all with the goal of supporting and accelerating the transition to locally sourced native plants. So here is a look at our partnerships. From left to right is the Southwestern Partnership, Central West, Greater Golden Horseshoe West and East. We at Carolinian Canada facilitate those 4 partnerships, and our good friends at Canadian Wildlife Federation facilitate the Eastern Ontario Partnership. We work pretty closely together to align and support our activities in support of all of the folks in all of these partnerships. And so you can see the circles are kind of big and loose and overlapping. This mapping, we're still working on updated, really cool mapping resources, but it doesn't define who can work together. Obviously, there's ecology at work on the landscape. There are relationships that already exist. There are lots of complexities. These don't kind of limit anything. They simply present opportunities of where people are working together and where folks can become involved. So a lot has been happening lately. Throughout 2025, we've held virtual meetings, many of them for each of these partnerships. We've had really exciting conversations and collected information around regional priorities and focal species. We've got a partnership survey out there now. I'd love to share the link in the chat after I'm finished. If you're in the Ontario region and you'd like to contribute, it's a really important tool to assess some of the gaps and assets and inform the work that we're doing next. And we're going to wrap up last year's activities with some summaries that we're going to share with the regional partnerships. And excited about what's coming next. We've got an in-person event that I'll tell you about in a moment. And we've recently launched a SOS logo that we're pretty excited about. I'll give you a look at that. You can see the main logo on the left, the icon on the right, and the acronym underneath that. This logo is really designed to create visibility and show alignment between all of the activities that support the SOS or that the SOS supports. There's been incredible things happening in the region long before the strategy came out. So folks adopting this logo can really help show that alignment and show that support. So you might be able to guess that the plant we chose for our logo is bloodroot. So there were lots of other plants considered, but we really settled on this one for its cultural significance. It's a plant with long-standing significance to Indigenous folks. It's been welcomed as a sign of spring for thousands of years, and it embodies respect, relationship, and reciprocity with the land. And of course, its ecological significance, supporting early season nutrient cycles in forest systems. One of the earliest native spring blooms. I love seeing it pop up in the spring. It provides critical food for early pollinators, contributes to biodiversity, and is an indicator of healthy, resilient ecosystems. And using the SOS logo really means something. It reflects SOS values, demonstrating alignment with inherent ethics embedded within the strategy. So it shows what you're doing and how you're doing it, reflecting that activities center ecosystem health and cultural importance, reflect Indigenous leadership and stewardship, address climate change and biodiversity loss, reinforce collaboration across the native seed and plant sector, and connect partners to a shared vision of a sustainable green economy. So our upcoming event is going to be on February 26th with an Indigenous folks only event the day before to help guide and inform our activities on the 26th. So we're really excited about this first of its kind in-person event and the partners that are helping to put it together and to fund it. And of course, thankful for the support of all of the folks who have been a partner and a funder of this important work. And thank you so much. If you'd like to learn more, we'd love for you to participate in the survey. We'd love to hear from you. So there's my direct email, as well as you can reach out to the SOS team at seed@carolinian.org. Thanks, folks.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jen. That was great. The Southern Ontario Seed Strategy is a really inspiring initiative. And you, I have to say, are a wonderful facilitator and coordinator. I enjoy working alongside you and your team. So our next speaker that's providing a regional update is Paul Laporte. So Paul is the owner of Ephemeral Arc Native Plant Nursery, where he specializes in the propagation of native woodland species. He currently serves as the chair of the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association, is a member of the Ontario Biodiversity Council, and is an active contributor to the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy. He consults regularly with municipalities, non-government organizations, land trusts, and horticultural associations on native invasive species management, ethical seed collection and propagation, and the establishment of orchards, all to build biodiversity within native plants. Paul will present an introduction to the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association and demonstrate how strategic partnerships can play a critical role in scaling the production of native species. He will then discuss the importance of preserving multiple genetic lines when cultivating native species and highlight the ecological benefits as well as the key challenges involved. You can see your talk there, Paul. Take it away
Thanks,
when you're ready.
Okay, so as was mentioned, I own a small nursery called Ephemeral Arc in Durham Region. I am right near Port Perry, which is on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. And I'm also the chair of the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association. So I'm very happy to be involved in this and under the nurturing care of World Wildlife Fund and Carolinian Canada and Canada Wildlife Federation. All of the nurseries you see here have been collaborating over the course of the last 6 years, roughly. So not quite as much as Chet with 30 years, but similar to what Robert mentioned, we are in various stages of our development. So we are encouraging more growers to join the association, and hopefully this year we're going to have the capacity to do so by hiring a coordinator. But basically the whole point of getting together, and the reason for this obviously is collaboration to improve efficiencies amongst growers and to share our knowledge and our understanding of native species in terms of actually growing them, but also in terms of pest management and growing techniques, and generally just sharing knowledge and what we know and improving how we actually approach growing plants and providing them throughout the province. So everyone has their own niche. Some people grow trees, some people grow herbaceous species. There's a lot of people who have knowledge in growing sedges or rare species, and bringing all this knowledge together obviously helps really create a much stronger network of seed producers and plant producers, which is also very important. I know this discussion is largely about plant seeds, but generally speaking, some of them produce a finite amount of seed and they aren't generally cast, so they need a little bit more nurturing in the early onset of their development. As was mentioned by Jennifer, there's a strong demand for native species, and it's growing all the time exponentially, and that demand is really hard to meet. Supply is not as high as the demand is, and in particular for certain types of species. And that's once again one of the reasons for collaboration, is helping every nursery to collect different genetic lines and improve the volume and the amount that we can offer from different locations. So there are different designs, and people are starting to come into tune with the notion of using native plants to mitigate a lot of the issues that we all have talked about today. And they really are wonderful, not only in terms of their beauty, but also obviously what they provide for our ecology. So this is a new field, but it's also burgeoning, and I think everyone on this call is well aware of that. So lots of things to be considered there, but the reality is we don't want to have genetic bottlenecks either. So sometimes a certain supplier might only have a certain limited amount of seed from a particular area, and it is really valuable to be able to increase that supply. Typically, as a grower, I do focus on woodland species, and I speak an awful lot about particular types of woodland species. I've spoken about Jack in the Pulpit in the past. Jennifer mentioned bloodroot, which is also another species that I grow. Really difficult to grow, I might add. They take up to 5, sometimes 10 years to grow some of these woodland species. Today, I want to talk a little bit about Dutchman's Breeches, which is yet another one of those fine wine plants in the early spring. It does practice myrmecochory, so ants disseminate the seeds. But in the early springtime, it is a great forage material in April for pollinator groups, and often this is an overlooked regime of plants, the early spring flowering plants, which are really challenging to propagate. As I mentioned, you can't necessarily go about casting Dutchman's breeches seeds and hope for the best. It does help to have a little bit of initial nurturing from a grower. But again, this forage material is integral. This is a true ephemeral, so it disappears at a certain time of the year through succession, allowing other species to grow. And it forms a part of a community within Ontario at this stage. So all of those pollinators waking up at this time, they really do rely on these species. So it's important not to overlook these species in terms of propagation and restoration. Dicentra itself has another plant within Ontario, Dicentra canadensis, but essentially I'm speaking mostly about Cucullaria today. The range of Dicentra cucullaria is in eastern Ontario, largely speaking, but it is also part of the Columbian Basin, which includes Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And that's really quite fascinating because the last glaciers that came through cut the giant forest that would have been there, and it basically left this as a relic population. And it is very distinct. It has a variation name of occidentalis, so Dicentra cucullaria variation occidentalis, and it is distinct. So it's been isolated for upwards of 1,000 to 10,000 years. And within that, it's developing its own unique adaptations to its area. Now, I am coming to you from Ontario specifically, and within this, it helps exemplify the need for really focusing on collecting as many genotypes as possible. So within Ontario, obviously, we have different land classes, and Dutchman's breeches, Dicentra cucullaria, won't grow in necessarily all of these areas. But it is mainly found in southern Ontario, but you will find it in areas such as ecoregion 4E and throughout southern Ontario here. So within each one of these ecoregions, which is what growers try and do, they try and collect with provenance in mind, and the idea that we are trying to scale up these ecoregions and their local genotypes. And that will essentially prevent some sort of outbreeding depression, but also it can enhance at a certain point the issues around inbreeding. And this is pretty much well known because of fragmentation, myrmecochory. You can't have these species often interacting as they would have in the past. And obviously, Ontario has a strong history of development, and it's continuing to this day. And unfortunately, that is really exacerbating the issues. Development continues to blast through many of the naturalized areas, even though there may be conservation involved. Largely speaking, fragmentation and the loss of some of these genotypes only exacerbates the issue going forward. In addition, as was mentioned before by Hillary, we also have, or Hillary didn't, but she mentioned that there was a mention on invasive species. We have these also impacting the plight of native species in situ. So having these genetic genotypes interact with one another does involve actually collecting from different areas and having growers and a multitude of different participants joining together collectively, be it land trusts, be it horticultural societies, be it municipalities, obviously NGOs, all of us working together to really try and scale and preserve the genetics that remain. Because all of these seeds and basically having the resilience to move forward in the future, be it more drought tolerance or inclement weather and the ability to actually weather the future climate change that is taking place, that involves having access to this seed, and that involves having a situation where we can isolate them and perhaps orchard them through many different partnerships. So things like different species of trilliums, different genetic lines, having them orchard and maintaining the integrity so that we can then at some point perhaps create what it would be called a composite species where you join them together. But orcharding involves many different people, including landowners and all different people involved. So the scaling process is very challenging. Particularly for woodland species, as I'm trying to exemplify here, but ultimately the goal, it achieves multiple results in the sense that we're also getting a restoration site, but also a seed orchard, and we're preserving those genetics and the main focus being our local fauna and the resilience of the biodiversity within Ontario. So all of these organisms here dependent on healthy ecosystems rich with native species, and it's a vital component to have collaboration and a variety of genetics within that regime. So thank you very much. I hope that I maintained my timeline, Jeanette. And that's all for me.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much, Paul. I always enjoy your presentations and the wealth of knowledge and insights you share, and of course the cute animal and pretty plant pictures. So yes, we are running a bit over time. I checked in with Renny, who's our final speaker of the day, and he's okay to go over. So I apologize to the audience that we're going over a bit of time. So I'd like to now introduce Renny. So Renny Grilz is a grassland ecologist, native seed producer, and the 2024 Newfield Canada Scholar. He has over 30 years of experience working in prairie conservation across Western Canada and currently serves as Director of Conservation with the Meewasin Valley Authority in Saskatoon. Renny and his wife Lisa own Blazing Star Wildflower Seed Company, a family-run native seed business founded more than 30 years ago. So Renny's Newfield research focused on native seed producer networks, seed banking, and restoration policy, drawing lessons from Europe and North America to inform Canada's emerging native seed systems. He is Vice President of the Native Seed Producers of Canada and a founding member of the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange. He regularly speaks nationally and internationally about native seed, grassland management, and habitat restoration. So I see your slide there, Renny, so take it away when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Jeanette, and thank you for the invite to participate in this seminar today. And it's great to see so many people from across Canada, but also we have numerous people from across the world joining us. And there's a group with the Society for Ecological Restoration called the International Native Seed-Based Restoration, and they got shared out in that group. So I think we have people from as far away as Australia and different parts of Africa joining us today. So welcome for joining us here in cold and snowy Canada. So today what I'm going to talk about is two different aspects. I'm going to talk about my experience as part of my Nuffield scholarship studying native seed industry worldwide. And then also I'll talk a little bit about an emerging group here in Canada, the Native Seed Producers of Canada. So in 2024, I received a scholarship through the Nuffield Canada Agricultural Scholarship. And this is actually an international organization where scholars receive funding to do a travel-based project to learn from other people from around the world, share that, take that knowledge back home to their home country and to their home farming operations, and then share that information globally. Worldwide, we have a network of 1,700 scholars that are part of this alumni with representation from every continent around the world. And studying everything from myself, I looked at, when my cohort in 2024, I was looking at the native seed industry, but here in Canada, some of my colleagues were looking at Indigenous agriculture, agritourism. I had a colleague in Tasmania studying the tulip industry. I had someone from downtown London studying black soldier flies. So it's a real diverse group of people that are studying agriculture globally. I would like to thank my sponsors for this project, specifically Nature Conservancy of Canada, for their tremendous support to being my primary sponsor, but also several other organizations throughout Western Canada, including Brett Young Seeds, Saskatchewan Provincial Parks, Meewasin Valley Authority, where I work. And then today also we heard from Chet Nuffield with the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan and several other groups. So with this scholarship, I had the opportunity to travel to Brazil and to Europe and then across North America. And what I wanted to look at was what are some of the different international models that can help grow native seed systems. And I was trying to look at those barriers and enablers that were trying to help grow this industry here for the prairies. I also, one of the projects I'm working on in my full-time job in Meewasin is looking at seed banking. And so I wanted to look at how seed banking can play a role with the native seed industry, and then also exploring those different market types. My report's in final draft version. I'm presenting it at the end of the month in Victoria to the Nuffel Canada Global Knowledge Conference, and it'll be going live within the next few weeks, my report. As part of my experience, I went and traveled the world. I met with native seed producers from different parts of Europe, United States, and across Western Canada. I also had the opportunity to visit several seed banking operations, whether it's large global seed banks like the Cumulum Seed Bank out of Wakehurst, England, or the USDA seed bank at Fort Collins, which is tied in with the National Native Seed Strategy work that's being done in the United States, to small organizations such as Native Seed Search in Tucson, Arizona, that's preserving and conserving heirloom crop species with indigenous peoples. And so learning from those different operations and trying to bring that information back to Canada. And then also visiting various restoration projects, whether it's urban landscaping projects to large scale restoration work, to wilding projects as well. And then also having those connections, attending various conferences, having numerous conversations, and just creating that network around the world and sharing experiences. Coming back here to Western Canada, what's really driving the need for restoration is that rapid loss of our prairie grasslands here in Western Canada. Right now, it's estimated that there's about 20% left of our grasslands in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba combined, with the majority more in that southwestern Saskatchewan, southeastern Alberta. In Saskatchewan, there's some latest information from the Ministry of Environment here in Saskatchewan that there's less than 16% of our grasslands remaining. And if you go south of Winnipeg, that tall grass prairie, there's less than 1%. So the dire is really there for this to preserve that genetic material, but also a great opportunity from a restoration perspective to try and connect these fragmented landscapes. So, why is a strengthened seed sector important here for Canada? So, if we're looking at restoration at scale, we need a really vibrant seed system to meet these demands for large-scale restoration. Some of the goals tied to the bond challenge that Canada signed on to as part of the Global Biodiversity Framework was calling for 2 million hectares of land to be restored in Canada by 2030. Most of that restoration work is native seed based. And so being able to do that scale of restoration requires a healthy seed industry. Also, I mentioned about that loss of habitat and using restoration as a tool to connect those connectivity of those landscapes. Canada, as a part of the international community, has signed on to these large restoration targets. So as part of the Global Biodiversity Framework, we committed to restoring 30% of degraded habitats here in Canada by 2030. A big, seed is a key component to that restoration. Also, using local adapted seed from Canadian sources helps improve restoration success. It builds that climate resilience. And also, here, especially in Western Canada, when we're doing prairie scale restoration, quite often we do not have enough seed available. I myself, I'm a restoration practitioner. Quite often I have to rely on imports of seed from the United States to meet my requirements. And so building that sector here in Canada allows us to use that locally sourced seed. Also, restoration and native seed industry is a way to advance reconciliation on multiple levels. We heard about some of the work being done in Southern Ontario, the work with the BC Seed Bank, and that is a form of restoration, is this conservation of our medicines and our food species. And then also, it is a way to strengthen our rural economies. My parents, when they started Blazing Star Wildflower Seed Company over 30 years ago, it was part of an economic diversification project for their family farm. So today we heard about this leadership that's emerging across the country. We're hearing about these regional seed systems in Southern Alberta, Southern Ontario, that are bringing all these producers and users groups together. We're hearing about the emergence of seed banks in Yukon and in British Columbia. We're also looking at the provenance and integrity of our genetic material of plants as part of the collection of seed and growing that out. trying to build the capacity of our producers and our restoration practitioners, and then trying to challenge some of those constraints in the market. Within the seed system, it's not just going out, getting some seed and starting that restoration project. There is a pipeline process. Collection, the wild harvesters, the people going out and collecting that original genetic material is the start. Storing that seed until we can pass it on to the seed producer, whether it's in a seed bank or in other ways of storing that seed. Working with producers to increase that production, and then on the ground restoration. One of the things that we have to think of too is that native seed and native seed production is a form of agriculture. And I think that's quite often forgotten about, that the seed producers that are producing seed are farmers. They are agronomists. They are getting that plant material, and it is a farm commodity. And so we have to look at it as a way to provide those systems to support those producers. Some of the challenges that we're facing here in Canada is the seed sector is very fragmented. Chet talked about the survey that he did with the Native Plant Society of the native seed industry. There's estimated 50 to 70 seed producers. However, they're really small. Quite a few of them are just hobby seed harvesters or growers that are sharing that seed with other people. And most of them are very, very small producers, and that are not doing it as full-time work. And so we're very fragmented. We don't know who we are. We don't talk to each other. We're also very secretive as well, and don't share our experiences. And that's something that I've saw traveling the world, is that the seed producers are very secretive as well. And so trying to break that down and trying to get ourselves cohesive and working together. There's also a low number of producers, but also that seed bank. Here in Canada, we only have 2 national seed banks. We got the Agriculture Canada one here in Saskatoon, and then we have the National Tree Seed Centre in New Brunswick. Here at the Ag Canada Centre here in Saskatoon, they're mainly focused on crop species. They do have some native plant material, but it's very limited, and they're at full capacity. And so we're looking at developing a network of seed banks could help improve that situation. Also, we see inconsistent demand for seed, and then also that short-term procurement. Quite often you get a phone call, I'm doing a restoration projects, I need seed within a month or yesterday. Do you have seed available? Instead of looking at this long-term contracting opportunities to rely on to help grow that industry. And then too, when seed is not available, we rely on that imported seed, typically from the United States. So, to help build a resilient native seed industry, and, I'm saying here in Western Canada because that's what my focus was on with my NOFEL project, but this could be applied all across Canada, is, that seed production has to focus on producers. The producers are the ones that are out on that land increasing that seed. And so working with the producers and recognize them is really critical to help grow that industry. Developing that network of seed banks so that seed is available if when it's needed for future production. So I myself as a producer, if I am looking for something like sweetgrass, I saw in the comments people were asking about sweetgrass, I can go into that local seed bank, ask for some seed, and then use that for increase, and then have that genetic material available for future projects. Also working with on policy and procurement and governance. And so working with developing policies, so could be native species as part of that restoration for along highways. And then maybe the next step could be Canadian source seed as the priority for native seed. And that'll help build that industry and build that supply. And if you increase that demand, it should increase the supply over time. Also, as seed producers and plant producers, we have to look at that market diversification as well and innovation as well. So instead of just looking at, okay, I'm going to provide seed only for restoration purposes, maybe there's other opportunities, whether it's greening urban infrastructure opportunities, it's for pollinator habitat, it's for creating buffer strips around crops, or other opportunities, and also that research component as well. And then also expanding that collaboration across the country between producers, between groups and agencies that are wanting seed, to government, to provincial, to local agencies as well. So building that collaboration and communication amongst all the groups. So what I really, coming out of that, my project and meeting with people from around the world and through producers here in Western Canada, I really those three main pillars is really what came out of. And looking at producers as that centered part of that native seed production. And then, as sort of key priorities is work with and create these producer hubs where it's not just also producers talking to each other, but also sharing resources for seed cleaning, testing, storage, and equipment. One of the things that was interesting that I found traveling the world is the lack of equipment availability for native seed production. And didn't matter if I was in Estonia or in Germany or here in Saskatchewan, quite often we were using the same pieces of equipment that were not adequate for seed cleaning and for storage. Also, we do not have a foundation seed program here in Canada where seed can be collected and stored and then used for future production. And then also that provenance tracking as well, where Germany has a really good example of tracking that provenance of species from the wild type seed that's originally harvested all the way through the production line. And there's numerous producers in other parts of the world that are working on that. The procurement contracts where you're looking at a 5-10 year supply should help stabilize demand, knowing in the future that someone will be requiring seed for, say, a pipeline project or an urban restoration project, that there's that seed's available. Also, there's no training opportunities or very limited training opportunities for people that are interested in getting into the business or that are in the business as well, and working with the different groups on that training. So looking at these outcomes short term, these hubs working together, as we start getting more people working together and talking, then we can actually maybe see some of these active producers increase over time. And then as we increase the supply, hopefully demand will also increase. And then we'll see hopefully increased growth of that seed industry. Seed banks as that sort of that cornerstone for native seed supply chain as part of that storage. So for myself, one of the projects I'm working on here at Meewasin Valley Authority is looking at creating a prairie-focused seed bank facility for native plant species, and for that storage and that access, not just for that genetic conservation, but access for seed producers and restoration practitioners as well. But also align that collection with targets within the Global Biodiversity Framework for conservation of species per species, but then also using storage protocols from other groups around the world. Integrating that indigenous-led collections as well for culturally significant species, and for the work that's being done in British Columbia on seed banking, that's a real cornerstone of the work that they're doing, and I think there's a need for that here in the prairies as well. And then also there's an opportunity to link the seed bank collections to future foundation seed production as well. And then also, I think as we see these regional hubs of seed banking being developed, I think we'll see a national seed bank network forming as well. And we're seeing that in other parts of the world. So Germany has 4 main national seed banks or 4 main seed banks that are working on native species, and they've created a network for themselves. And I can see us eventually over time, as seed banks are formed, that this network will form here in Canada. Looking at governance and procurement and policies, and really policy will help make markets. So in Europe, there's some really strong policies for the need for use of native species for restoration and seed that is directly from that country and from specific seed zones. And so, for example, in Germany, they have 22 seed zones, which has created whole industries and whole production networks within each of those seed zones, supplying seed into the network for restoration. And so that development could help lead into the growth of the industry. So Jeanette and Carolyn were talking about the National Native Seed Strategy. I think that's definitely one of the first phases here in Canada, is getting ourselves a National Native Seed Strategy. United States has had one in place since 2015 that has helped lead to the development of a huge growth in their seed industry over the last 15 years. And I think, or 10 years, sorry. And I think this is something key that we need here in Canada. Also, we, especially in the prairies, we do not have seed zones. We have it in the forestry industry, but we don't have it within our grassland communities. Also, a lot of native seed falls under the common seed classification under the Canadian Seed Act, and there's no certification standards for a lot of native species. And so there's a lot of uncertainty what you're buying. And so, maybe some sort of certification standards might help the consumer know what they're getting. Also, native seed being used within public funded projects. There's been a lot of talk this last 6 to 8 months of Canada First. And I think, if we're looking at publicly funded projects, if there's a demand for a requirement for Canadian grown seed as the first priority, that'll help producers as well. And then also provide incentives and tax credits for seed producers, but also private landowners that are willing to provide their lands for people to go out and collect seed on their lands as well. So short term, looking at taking that National Native Seed Strategy that's in the works, but then taking that to the next step to design policy and frameworks. Also looking at taking these strategies and implementing them at the provincial level and at the federal level as well. And then having seed, native seed embedded across biodiversity and climate programs across the country. Also looking at diversification of native seed and creating that innovation as well. And, having the native seed and native plants embedded in everyday land use. Working with municipalities on developing native landscaping standards for their green infrastructure projects or their different projects that are occurring in those urban municipalities and rural municipalities as well. Also, work with producer groups on expanding pollinator habitat programs. And there has been some great work done with various commodity groups across the country, but to make this mainstay programs, there's been a lot of work in places like the United Kingdom where there's incentive schemes for creating pollinator habitat within your cropping system, and there's incentives to those producers. The role that Indigenous opportunities will help create and expand the market. If you look at the communities that looking at developing food systems, medicine, and cultural plant enterprises, I think there's a huge opportunity there in these communities that native plants can play in these communities. And there's a huge economic opportunity. And there's been some work being done across the country on this. And I think there's a huge opportunity for those communities. And then also developing branding and certification for native plants that are being used as horticultural projects. And we're seeing that in Southern Ontario, with the Native Plant Growers Association. And I think there's opportunity here across the country for that. So creating that diversification, looking at demonstration projects and marketing tools as individual seed producers, but also end users of native plant material too, expand municipal and retail demand for native plants, and then look at that sustained growth, not just in our agricultural aspect, but in urban areas and cultural markets as well. And then looking at that collaboration and national coordination, and that the partnerships are essential for the growth of the industry. And I'll be talking, the Native Seed Producers of Canada was just recently formed, and, to have that group, to be part of that voice and coordination of that native seed industry. Also looking at ways to know who's out there as native seed producers and sharing that information. Opportunities like this that we have today where we're able to share ideas and exchange knowledge and experiences, and then look at funding programs to help implement strategies and that coordination. And then also taking these local groups and have them connected into these larger national strategies as well, is I think going to be a real key outcome of this type of work as well. So now I'm going to shift over into the native seed producers of Canada, and there's quite a few of us that are in the room today that are part of the native seed producers of Canada. We were formed last year in late 2024 as a group of native seed producers talking about how can we help be a voice for the industry and help grow the industry. Our chair is Jenny Fortier with Northern Wildflowers, and also we have John and Michael Skinner from Skinner Native Seeds, and then Philip Dennis with Keene out of Quebec, but we also have 13 other producers that are officially joined on as members of the Native Seed Producers of Canada. And we are an association of farmers that are dedicated to growing and strengthening native plant seed supply here in Canada, or native seed supply here in Canada. And we're focusing on the native wildflower or the forb industry and the grass seed markets. We know the tree and shrub industry is a little bit different, so we're really focusing on those grass and forb seeds as part of the Growers Association or Producers Association. And then what we're trying to do is unite the seed producers and to bring our voices together, and we can share ideas, share resources, and then have a strong voice for the industry. One of the projects that we've just launched is a voluntary seed label system. And this is built upon the success of the work that's being done in Germany through their Native Plant Producers and Native Seed Producers Association. The acronym is VWW, where they've developed a system where they're tracking the seed through the system as wild type seed and how many generations where it's source identified, they're tracking the provenance, and they're and using that as a marketing tool for their seed. As part of that, as they were developing that, it's actually created a whole market and then requirements legally for that seed to be used in the industry. So we've just launched this project in the last couple of months. And right now we have 5 native seed growers that are part of this model. And so what the intention is to track how many generations from wild type seed that is from. So wild type seed is the original source, and then how many years or how many generations you've grown in seed production. Where it's been, where that original source was collected from, but then also where it's currently being grown as well. And then the intention is not to replace the current labeling system through the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, but it's intended to help supplement that. And so really what it is to build that buyer confidence in knowing that you're getting seed from local sources and what that seed and that provenance is from. So we're a fairly new organization. We've just started, like I said, in the last year. We have a whole big list of opportunities to work on over the next few years. And we're looking at these opportunities to engage and to work with various groups. And also, if there's any native seed producers in the room, please reach out to our website, nativeseedcanada.ca, and reach out to us, and we'd be happy to talk to you. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining my portion of the webinar. My report, my NUFALD report is going to go live on the NUFALD website in the next week or so. And so keep track of that. And yeah, thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you so much, Renny. That was an excellent presentation to round off an amazing series of talks from all of our speakers today. I really appreciate all of the information and advice you've shared, and would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of today's speakers. So thank you very, very much. And so to finish off today's webinar, we have time to address some of the questions that have been left in the Q&A box. So thanks to all the speakers. I see that some people have started already to answer some of those questions. So I'm going to stop sharing so the speakers can pop on if they would like while they answer questions. And also, before I get into the Q&A box, I wanted to share one of the questions that one of the audience members has shared with me via email. So Larry asked, how do we convince governments to change procedures to use native seeds? A prime example is in BC. The Forest Practices Code suggests that when decommissioning logging roads, hydroseeding with non-native grasses is an accepted practice. Changing this one policy to deploying native seeds would immediately create a huge demand for native plants. So Renny, if you or someone else or more than one would like to address that question. Oh, you're on your.
Yeah, I was just seeing if anyone else was willing to jump on that first.
Okay.
Okay. So can you repeat the question, Jeanette, again, please?
Yeah, so just how do we convince governments to change procedures to use native seeds? So the example they give is in BC, the Forest Practices Code suggests that when decommissioning logging roads, hydro seeding with non-native grasses is an accepted practice. So changing this one policy to deploying native seeds would immediately create a huge demand for native plants.
Yeah, no. Yeah, thank you, Jeanette. So yeah, in terms of changing that policy, I think it takes time, right? And so what, for example, here in Saskatchewan, Chet was talking about Department of Highways and doing these demonstrations and showcasing the use of native seed, was a start, right? But they still haven't fully adopted it as a policy within the government, right? And so I think showing these successes, but also usually the first response when you try and create this policy changes is, oh, there's no seed available, native seed available, so let's go to agronomic species. And that's usually the fallback. We see it in the oil and gas industry here in Western Canada as well, is quite often the protocols are to use native species, but then they do sort of a quick, try and get a quote for price seed, and then there's no seed, and then they say, oh, there's none here, so let's fall back to agronomy or agronomic species. So I think it's sort of a combination of multiple things. One is show the successes of part of that restoration using native species, showing that it can be cheaper over the long term. Two, working with producers to try and increase that supply of seed as well. So when those projects come forward, there's seed available. I think three is having those long-term contracts or knowing that those projects are coming up 3 to 5 years ahead of time. So right now, if you want a specific species for a restoration project, it may not be available, but a producer would have to, get wild type seed, get it planted down, get a seed increase, and then have it available for market. So you're looking at a 5-year lag time. And so if you're a producer and you're knowing this is going to be a future need, they could start, collecting that seed ahead of time and start producing it. However, one of the things that we are missing too in the system is that storage capacity as well. So as a producer, you want to try and move out that seed as fast as possible because that's your economic return. But you have limited storage capacity because quite often a lot of these species reduce germination and viability within 1 to 2 years post-production. So if there is a way for that storage of that seed for the longer term, then it's available when it's needed for that production. And we've seen in the United States with some of the works with the Seed of Success program and the storage facilities that the Bureau of Land Management has created, they're buying the seed, they're storing the seed, and then when it's needed for situations like wildfires, that seed is available to be used on projects. And I think that's something that we need to see developed here as well. So it's multiple aspects that have to be available there. So when the policy and the regulators are saying we need seed to be used in this project, that the whole supply network is there and the seed's available at the moment when it's required. And it's a big issue that has to be created. It's the whole supply chain has to be looked upon to create that. We've seen in Germany, sorry, I'm taking this, I'm talking too long here, but we've seen this in Germany where, we have over a couple hundred different native seed producers working together to meet this supply and demand and that storage capacity issue, right? And so, it has been done. It hasn't been done here in Canada, but there are models out there that we can look at to make it work.
Great. Thank you for that. So Lorenzo has a couple of questions I'm going to hit on in the Q&A. The first one, I'll leave it open in the chat maybe, or if any speaker has a quick response, they can let me know. But so are there any toolkits available for people who want to rewild their green areas with native plants? So I think there are different resources available. So if people want to either pop on and share them or share their favorite resources in the chat, I think it's a good opportunity to share those with this audience. The second question from Lorenzo is, how do we move education on native seed from niche spaces into schools and mainstream public awareness? Does
Can you
anyone
hear
want
me?
to try
I
to?
can take a. Oh, Hillary, go ahead. Please go ahead, Hillary.
Oh, I didn't realize I was muted. Okay, I just have a quick thought on that. Moving education from niche spaces. In my experience, and I've been in lots of different places all over Canada, but I think it usually starts with locating the seed champions that are already in that community, because they're there. Like I haven't met many people on this phone call, but you're all seed champions in your different communities. So I think those people are more than happy and often like overjoyed to put together programming that talks about the native plants and the seeds in their very specific areas. So Lorenzo, I would start by like looking hyper locally for those people in your community, because they do exist. And we've had some high school programming and just kind of more like summer camp programming as well, or day programs, and they are super well received, and we're often asked to come back. But it wasn't through any official territorial initiative to get seed programming into schools or get youth involved. It was just like local champions for this kind of work. So that would be my advice.
Great.
Oh, can you hear me?
Who? Oh, Chet. Yes, we can hear
It's
you.
Yeah, it's Chet here. I'll just add, we did something similar to this about 10 years ago. And what we did in Saskatchewan was to directly contact the Ministry of Education here, because they update their curriculum every so often. And when they do so, they often need to develop resources to support that new curriculum. And so we basically said, we'll do some of this work for you. We'll do your job for you, which they're very happy to have us do. What we did was they have learning objectives for each grade, each science. We focused on the science curriculum, but you could make it to anything. And recently, their curriculum is getting more interrelated. So in social studies, they'll also talk about native plants and indigenous uses of those native plants in the different geographic regions. They like these cross-curricular connections. We focused on science. We made a teacher lesson plan for each grade. You can find it on our website, and it's got the exact learning objectives for the science curriculum that each of these lesson plan exercises relates to. And that worked really well. The other thing that we did, the Ministry of Education has a list of all of the organizations that provide educational resources, and we got ourselves on that list. So I'm often getting cold called or emailed by teachers or schools wanting some of these educational resources. Most of it that we produce is digital. Some of it we have print versions, like big posters with geographic regions of Saskatchewan and what grows in each ecoregion, for example. And then another group that kind of I got haphazardly into is homeschoolers. They need resources all the time. And there are more homeschoolers out there than you think, and they talk amongst each other. They've got Facebook groups. So if you get into a couple of those groups, that's a great way. In fact, my son was privately schooled. He's now homeschooled by my wife and I. And I can tell you there is a definite need for those types of resources, and that will get your foot in the door with that group as well.
Great. Okay, Carolyn, did you want to add to that, or do you think the other speakers covered what you were going to say?
No, that was awesome. And Tiffany Travers just put in a comment as well about native seed schools in community. And I would just say, kids, adults, it doesn't matter. People need their hands on seeds. It's very tactile, right? So real seeds is important to feel and create a connection.
Great. Yeah. So Pamela had a question. I think some of the speakers touched on it, but she wrote, is the import of native plant seed from outside of Canada by suppliers in Canada an issue to be concerned about? Here in BC, I was surprised to learn some time ago that native wildflower and grass seed is often collected from Washington State. As a local government, we often need large volumes of seed, but that isn't available through local seed suppliers, and we don't have capacity and infrastructure to collect and process seed from within our own parks. Does anyone want to comment on that? I know Renny has talked about this push for local markets, Canada markets.
I can tackle that if no one else wants to. Yeah, so from a prairie perspective, for us to do prairie-wide restoration of our grasslands, we're looking at hundreds or if not thousands of kilograms of seed required for large-scale grassland restoration projects. And so, our market is fairly integrated with the United States. A lot of species are the same across the border. And a lot of the larger seed companies can import that seed from different parts of the United States. Some of the challenges we have, though, with that is where is that seed coming from? Is it coming from, is it coming from North Dakota or Montana? So then, that'd be sort of geographically similar. But if it's starting to come in from Southern California, Texas, other parts of the United States, what is that genetic difference? And is that species adaptable to our climates here in say, Saskatchewan? Also, I'm one of the other side jobs I do, or my full-time job with Mewasson as well, I deal with a lot of invasive species. So as you start bringing in seed from other parts of the world or other parts of the United States, there's a really high risk of you bringing new invasive species in. And we've seen that here in Western Canada is the spread of downy brome. It came in through contaminated seed in the late 1980s, early 1990s on a pipeline project. And now we're seeing this spread throughout the region. And that's probably one of the biggest risks is not just the genetic and the failure of this restoration because of inadapted species to our climate, but also that spread of noxious weeds and invasive species. That's something that definitely keeps me awake at night as a restoration practitioner and a local weed inspector as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that answer. So Ross asks, are there any tax incentive programs to encourage reclamation with native seeds? Could this help create a more stable market pull where industrial companies see it as an advantage as opposed to a complex cost? So I see Carolyn has created an answer on there. Yeah.
I'm not aware
on that?
Yeah, I'm just not aware of tax incentives. I think, Rennie's shaking his head too. I really think we need to be moving to the policy regulations as being effective tools for that. And, Rennie gave such a good, clear answer about the forest roads in BC. If we create a policy structure, the whole system kind of has to fall in line, and then you get that support for producers that can supply. So it's an important piece. I'm just not aware. If others want to pipe in about tax incentives, that would be great.
I don't know anything specifically about tax incentive programs to encourage native seed use in reclamation or industrial restoration, but what I have seen in the absence of territorial or regional policies promoting that or legislating that is Indigenous rights holders of that specific area. In some cases, I've seen them creating their own policies for acceptable standards for restoration on their traditional territories. So this is actually the only time in my consulting experience that I've seen proponents sort of go above and beyond the the really lackluster policy that exists. So here, for example, like proponents have been signing on to MOUs with a certain nation that where they have their own mining policy in development that states, if you are going to explore or develop infrastructure on the traditional territory, you're going to perform state-of-the-art reclamation restoration, and it's going to look like X, Y, and Z, and it's going to include culturally significant native species. So yeah, maybe in the absence of something national or provincial, which we definitely need, looking to like the rights holders to be laying down the law. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think I'll pick one more question, and then if other speakers have want to address any of the other questions, please feel free to flag them. So the question I ask is from Mira, which is a possible question for everyone. How do you choose which species to collect from? What happens with rare species? Can you realistically replace communities that have been lost following mining using native seed, or by planting or seeding specific species? Does it create conditions for other or rare species to reestablish? So I guess, how do you pick the species that you use? Is sort of a last question. But again, if any of you have other questions you'd like to address, please feel free to flag.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
So obviously I have a selection of woodland species. I really appreciate that early spring wildflower forage material. So the landscape unfolds. I'm assuming that's the same across the country. And I have found in my 18 years of doing this that those species are often overlooked in propagation. So I do find that that's kind of been the motivation behind it, and seeing this, it lends itself to entomology as well. So you begin to appreciate the fauna that actually utilize these plants. So that's my reasoning for choosing woodland species within Ontario.
Does anyone else want to comment on the species? There's some other questions still coming in. People are very engaged, which is wonderful to see. So I think speakers are also invited to continue answering the questions. I think you'll have access to the chats and the Q&A afterwards too. And I encourage people, if you want me to or ask another question to a speaker that hasn't been addressed, please feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to address the question to the speakers. So there's a question here, just I guess it just came in, but how do we include appropriate native seed in national and regional strategies? So do you think that that's something that another group is taking care of, or do you have any suggestions? That's from Bonnie. Nobody on so I'll have to look into that one and get back to you, Bonnie, on that.
Well, Jeanette, I would just encourage everyone who's in this community to be talking about that, incorporating native seed into all of these policies for biodiversity, climate change mitigation, adaptation, etc. It's a small community we have, but it's a growing community, and I think we need to be having those conversations across all levels of government, actually.
Yeah, it's been so wonderful to see the conversations and connections being made in the chat too here today. Robert, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to speak about, like, in Waterton Lakes, if we have activities that require restoration, we do require native seed to be used in any type of restoration work. The problem is that, as we've mentioned multiple times, is that there's just no seed available. And industry acts at a monthly basis, not a pre-planning years in advance for what they need for restoration. I think Renny touched on this as well. So when they we let out a contract for a disturbance, they do their disturbance, and then when they're done, they say, oh, we need to now restore, and here's our seed, and they have 2 or 3 species that aren't even native to the area, and that's the process. That's kind of why we started in Waterton collecting our own native seed to supply for that. But I think you can make all the requirements you want, but unless you solve that seed supply issue, then you're not going to get compliance, right? And it becomes like, well, we can't force them because they can't find it. So that's the fundamental problem. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for highlighting that. I see there's another question here that's been upvoted a couple of times, so maybe I'll I'll bring it, I'll read it out, and if anyone has comments on it, that would be great. So it says, many producers do great work to ensure local genetics and provenance of the seed they produce are tracked and preserved. As more producers become involved with the industry to meet the growing demand, what ethical or even legal considerations need to be taken into account to respect the labor and knowledge of existing producers if the seed they have produced is used to establish new operations? This may also have ramifications for overall population diversity. How should producers interested in getting involved with the industry broach these issues?
Yeah, that's a really good. Oh, you want to go ahead? Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's an interesting question, and there is a sort of a greater reasoning for why I think we all do this. So in my experience with the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association, there have been people who've retired. So there is a level of mentorship involved, and we are all mortal. So this information and knowledge transfer is quite valuable going forward. I don't think we should be looking at it in the finite, microcosm of today. So I don't myself find that there's much of a threat from this, given the industry is growing, and I do find that collaboration is key to success. So as I mentioned in my presentation, having multiple orchard sites that are keeping distinct genetic lines going, that involves a lot of different people. And so I think the more people who are interested in this industry, the better. And that includes schools, as was mentioned before. And I don't think on the lines of tax incentives, but I do think from a person-to-person, business-to-business relationship from the ground up, I think that, yeah, people can develop relationships where it is mutually beneficial. So I don't have proprietary nature towards what I do, and I think many growers see it the same way. We're looking at something bigger than just the self-benefit. So that's my opinion.
Great, thanks. And did you want to add to that, Renny, or all covered what you?
Yeah, so I was just going to talk, with the native seed producers of Canada, with coming out with that volunteer traceability labeling. When I was meeting with seed producers in England and Germany, and that traceability that they developed, the reason they did that was, part of it is for the consumer, also for confidence for the consumer and for the end user, but also for tracking long-term, when they sell the business to the next producer, or if they're sharing seed amongst each other, they could track that provenance as well. And so like right now, it's your own paper systems, your own knowledge, your own experience. And I've experienced this. Someone calls me and asks me, can I get some three-flowered Avon seed from you? Do you remember where you got it from? And you're scratching your head and you're going, well, I wrote on that that bag, it was from here, but you don't have those records. So it's really going to help us as producers to start developing systems for that tracking. There was a question from Nora about secrecy amongst native seed producers. What's interesting is I find here in Canada, we're definitely more open than we are in other parts of the world. In what I really found interesting was in Europe, that the level of secrecy amongst the producers was very high. I wanted to go see a seed producer in England, and he did not want to talk to me at all, even though it was another native seed producer that works with him, contacted him and asked if I can come and visit. And he was scared that I might get a competitive advantage from going to talking to him and visiting with him. Well, he's in England growing noxious weeds. There are noxious weeds here in Canada. And so it wouldn't be any competitive advantage for myself talking to him. But I went to visit with Ernst Rieger, with Rieger Hoffman, one of the largest native seed producers in Germany. And he spent a full day with me. And at the very end, I asked him, okay, so you spent a day with me. How come you invested so much time with me? And he said, you're not from Germany. You're not my competitor. If you were from France or if you were from Hungary, I wouldn't have spent as much time with you because you would have been my competitor here in Europe. And, I found that quite strange, that secrecy and that alarmness of the competitiveness. I think here in Canada, like Paul was saying, that a lot of us are in this for not altruistic, but for the better good, right? And we're looking at the biodiversity and conservation, and that's why a lot of us got into being growers in native plant material. And so I think that's actually one of the advantages we have as a Canadian market. We as growers or as plant producers are here because we want to see success on that landscape, and that should be part of our marketing and the story that we tell as producers. Sorry, that was a little bit of a
Absolutely.
soapbox.
No, that's great, and I think you hit on a lot of important points that should be highlighted. So I think we've hit most of the questions in the Q&A, or else people have responded to them. So I think that that's great. And there's been, again, lots of wonderful discussion in the chat and collaborations forming. So I think that we'll end it here. I just wanted to extend a deep thank you very much again to all of today's speakers. It was so helpful to learn more about the native seed and plant initiatives being advanced across the countries and seeing the parallels between them. I really hope that this will help develop relationships and foster more collaborations across these groups and with people in the audience. And I also wanted to thank everybody who joined us today from across the country and across the world. So in the coming weeks, I will share a video recording of this webinar. And please feel free to share it with your networks and anyone who you think might be interested. So I think that's it, but I'm wishing you all a wonderful rest of your day and would like to thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thanks to all.
everyone. Have a wonderful
Thank
afternoon.
you so much,
Thank you all.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Jeanette.
Thank you.